Hey there, today I want to talk to you about crop planting for your farm, garden, or homestead. Hey, so there's a lot to cover in this one, and I'm just going to talk about what is working well right now for me for crop planting and just give you some tips and things to think about for, whatever sort of situation you're growing for. Now, I'm not going to lay out a plan because I don't have a plan necessarily, a concrete, like I'm going to plant this and then that and then this. But what I want to explain to you guys is sort of a framework and a way to think about crop planting, because I think that is more applicable to more people, and you can use that in your planning. So there are some farmers out there that have been doing this a long time. They know exactly how long things are going to take, and they have, let's say you're doing a traditional CSA, and you can literally just like plan out every box. Like, I want to have tomatoes and lettuce and cucumbers this week, and the next week I'm going to have this and that, and then you just figure out how long they take to grow. You go back that far, and then you plant them. So like, if I know that radishes are going to take a month, well, if I want them in my box mid-June, then I plant them mid-May. So, it's pretty easy to figure that out. But, I don't have a set schedule like that. I have a ballpark of when I want to be planting stuff, if it's spring, summer, fall, that sort of thing. And then I think one of the things you need to be thinking about is succession planting. Now, I know a lot of home gardeners or homesteaders or, people just getting started, they'll go out and they'll just fill up all their beds right away, and then everything's ready at the same time, and then you don't have anything. So you want to sort of make a succession, meaning you want to plant the same crop but spaced apart in time so that you can have a continuous harvest. So if you want to be eating lettuce 6 months out of the year, well, you can't plant it all at the beginning of the year. You got to plant it successively, and I think that's one of the trickier things to figure out. And it's not linear in that if you plant 1 week apart, it will be ready 1 week apart. Now, in the springtime, stuff grows slower than it does in the summer, and in the fall it grows slower than in the summer as well. So, if you're middle of the summer and you're planting things a week apart, they'll generally come out a week apart. But if you're planting things in the springtime, let's say you plant them 3 weeks apart, if it's early spring, they may only be ready like a week apart, or maybe even right up next to each other. So, it takes some trial and error there. Now, I don't like to keep a super strict crop plan, which I just mentioned, and I like to have some flexibility. Now, if you haven't watched my video about how I sell things, I'll put a link up there. Check that out. And one thing I really talk about is having more than one sales outlet, because I sell to families in terms of a weekly box that I deliver, and I also sell to chefs. Now that I'm starting to sell to more chefs, I am sort of changing my crop plan mid-season, and this is why I like to have some flexibility. Now, you start working with some chefs, and they say, I want this, or I want that, I want this, so much of this per week, and then you can start to plan that. And you don't want to go all in with one restaurant, because what happens if that chef leaves, or the restaurant closes, or they find someone else to buy from, or whatever. So you don't want to like put all your eggs in one basket, but it's nice to have some flexibility in terms of changing things in the middle, or you're like, I'm gonna do radish every week, and then you realize in the middle of the summer that they're getting killed by pests, or they're not growing right, or whatever, and you have to change your plan. So you sort of see how that works. Now, the other thing for me, which is nice, is that I have some flexibility in my products with my families, because I can switch things up in the boxes, so I don't have to have exactly the same thing every week. Now, if you're selling to restaurants, for example, like if they want 10 pounds of Mizuna every week, well, you have to have 10 pounds of Mizuna for them every week, or they're not going to be happy. So your succession planting is crucial, and making sure you have the right crops out there for them to, so you can have the stuff that they want. Hey, so I'm out here filming about crop planting, and my boy Bobby came by, one of the chefs that I work with, and you want to introduce yourself, Bobby?
Yeah,
Where you work?
I'm Bobby. I'm the consulting executive chef for Y Hill Kitchen and Brewing, and yeah, thanks for having me out here. Oh, it was awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So Bobby's stopping by because I'm donating some cucumbers for an event that for a fundraiser, but by the time you guys watch this, the fundraiser already happened. But either way, so Bobby's going to come out here and pick some cucumbers. But while I have Bobby here, I just want to mention one of the things I was talking about was that I like to coordinate with chefs so that we can grow the right food. So is that helpful for you guys when we have those discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been out here for about 15 minutes, and we already talked about we talk a lot in the restaurant about the things that you grow, but it's another thing to just see it and to like the kale, that Ethiopian kale that you just pointed out to me, stuff that I didn't really know existed. And I think we're going to be having a lot of conversations about stuff that I want you to grow in the future, just for me being out here today.
That's awesome. I mean, that's what it's all about. So, you know, having chefs taste also what you're growing, but also seeing what you're doing, and really making that connection is really helpful. And honestly, it helps me plan for growing what you guys need. So that's, you know, that's really important.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me out here.
Yeah, man. And let's go get those cucumbers.
Let's do it.
All right. Hey, so that was super cool of Bobby to stop by. He was picking up some stuff, but you know, if you're in the Raleigh-Durham area, go check out Y Hill. Cool new restaurant. I've been starting to sell them a few things and build my relationship with their chefs and the people there, and they're really committed to trying to buy as much local food as possible. And so I'll put a link in the description below for Bobby's Instagram, so you can check him out, and also Y Hill. You can check them out too. So one thing I want to talk about here is location of planting. Now, you don't want to be planting really tall crops sort of in a place where they're going to block either irrigation or sunlight from other crops. So my beds are kind of face southeast and slope downhill, and so I put my larger, taller crops like cucumbers, which I've trellised over here, sort of in the back, and that way they're not blocking too much sunlight from crops that are, you know, behind them, and irrigation water, because I'm using overhead as well. So keep that in mind when you're planting stuff. You know, another place I planted all my patty pan squash at the bottom of my bed, so if they sort of get big and really overwhelming, they're sort of not, you know, taking over beds on either side. They'll look sort of all go together. So not just in terms of, you know, when you're planting stuff, but also keep in mind, you know, where you're planting stuff, because that can help other things grow or make things not grow. Another thing I want to mention is just really you got to think ahead. And we just passed the summer solstice here, but I'm already thinking, you know, a month or two down the road. So in my brain, it's, you know, what I'm planting now isn't coming out till, you know, mid to late summer for some things. So, you know, you're sort of planning ahead. And you got to remember that, especially if you're doing transplanted crops, like, you know, lettuce, for example, is 3 to 4 weeks, you know, before you can get it out in the ground. Some crops are less, some are a little bit more. So you really have to plan ahead. Now, if you're doing a lot of transplanting stuff, you can get a lot of, you know, a lot more yield sometimes out of beds, because, you know, while the stuff that's in the ground is finishing up, you have a transplant that's growing. So when you put it in the ground, it's already 3 or 4 weeks old. So you got to jump on that too. So, you know, for some things, transplanting can be great. You can get a lot more yield out of the same bed. All right, so let me give you a concrete example. One is cucumbers here. So I have 50-foot beds, and I planted one bed of cucumbers, and I've been harvesting off them for a month or so, and they're still cranking really well. But what I did was I planted another succession 1 month behind, and that was my guess that it would be a month apart. And you know, these are getting a little bit larger, and they're just starting to fruit, and I still have fruit in the other one. So, you know, if I only needed one bed worth, maybe I would have spaced these about 6 weeks apart. Maybe that would have been good. But again, it depends on when you plant them during the year. You know, the earlier you plant them in the year, as I said, you know, the longer it'll take to grow. So the successions will get compressed as the days get longer and the days are warmer. So for the other thing, you know, that I'm planting successions of is patty pan squash. And so I was planting beds every 2 weeks apart, and that seemed to be working pretty well. But it's one of those things you have to try your successions, take notes, record what happened, see what works, and then you can adjust next year. That's one of the things about farming, is you have to learn year to year and what works well for you, and keep the yield in mind. You know, right now, middle of summer, I want to have a bed of lettuce per week. So guess how many transplants I start a week? I started off for one bed a week. So that one's pretty easy to calculate. But you know, some of the other ones, you know, right now I'm doing a lot of baby greens too, so I'm trying to plant like every week. I'm going to try to plant out a couple beds of baby greens and just stay on top of it. It's easy to fall behind because you get caught up in a lot of stuff, and then all of a sudden you're, you know, 3 weeks later like, oh, I forgot to plant something, and then you know, a couple weeks later you're like, I don't have that because you didn't plant. So you really have to stay on top of your successions. All right, so I want to give you one more tool. This board here, this whiteboard, is how I keep track of what's in what bed and how I do some planning. I got this system when I used to be a brewer. This is how I used to keep track of what was in what tank. So I think it's really appropriate to use it for what's in which bed. It's super simple. I bought, in terms of cost, like I just slapped it together. I bought this at Lowe's for like $6, and it slides out so I can take it off if I want to, you know, clean it off really well. I just took a piece of PVC pipe. I cut a quarter of it out, screwed the top here, bottom here, and then, you know, these hold my little pens, which is super simple. You can also buy one for probably $30. It has all this stuff, but I just sort of DIY'd it to make it a little cheaper. The grid here, I just drew a Sharpie and then used dry erase for all the stuff that's in here. So I have all my beds listed, what's in what bed when I planted it, and I even list the successions here, like patty pan 1, patty pan 2, patty pan 3, cucumber 1, cucumber 2, which I was just talking about out there. So I find this to be really helpful. I can also keep notes about, like, you know, I want to start squash seeds on June 26th, or I have my seeding densities here for microgreens, you know, things that you just want to keep track of. But yeah, it's just a really good way to, you know, keep track of what's going on, because I used a spreadsheet last year and I just you know, when I'm running around planting stuff, I don't want to jump in front of a computer to record something. But this is super easy, and for me, it's a nice visual way to keep track of what's going on. So, you know, something like this can be really helpful for you guys to stay organized. One other thing I want to point out is that I don't have a strict crop rotation as well. Some farms do, and they'll take certain beds out of rotation and put them in cover crop, things like that. I don't, and I've mentioned this before, but I really try not to plant the same crop in the same bed twice in a row. So if I had radish in there, I'll plant lettuce. If I had kale, maybe I'll plant, you know, something else. So, you know, just not putting the same crop in the same bed every single time, I think is good enough for me right now. All right, so I hope this video wasn't too all over the place. I just want to give you some of my thoughts about how I crop plan. As I said, I'm a little bit more fluid with my crop planning based on what happens during the season. And again, this is partly from, you know, being my second season, but also how my business is changing and my sales outlets are changing a little bit too. And you know, sometimes if you don't have a lot of space, you might run into the problem where your transplants are ready and you don't have beds ready. So, you know, you sort of have to keep that in mind. And, you know, you also have to sometimes make the tough decision that, you know, when a crop is struggling from insects or lack of, you know, good germination or even germination, like, it's okay to pull it out and just plant something else in there if you don't think it's going to be as profitable as it can be with something else. So don't be afraid to pull out a bed if you need to, that sort of thing. Anyways, I hope you found this useful, and you know, as you guys are moving through your season and you can keep some of these ideas in mind, I hope they're helpful. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share with your friends, all that stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.